Greetings and welcome to another episode of Genre Grinder. I am your host, Gabe, and with me today is returning guest Justin Clark. Justin, say hi.
Hi.
You may remember him from the video game episode. So if they don't remember you, tell them what you do, Justin, who you are, why you're important.
So every once in a while I get called in by GameSpot and Slant Magazine to go throw some words up about video games, and it's not very high paying, but it is keeping me awash in new games, which is the only way I can afford them.
So Justin is sort of one of a couple of video game friends, since I'm not well versed, but I do play video games. And he's one of my heavy metal friends, since I'm really bad at keeping up with new music. I use him and a couple other people to try to see what's going on in the metal scene. And important to this particular episode, he's one of my black friends. Because we're going to be talking about a particularly challenging genre today called Afrofuturism. And I don't know if it's clear, but I'm white, and I don't want to talk about Afrofuturism with another white person.
Wait. Hold on. You're white?
I know the nasal voice is not a complete giveaway, and that I don't post pictures of myself on Twitter all that often, but you're just going to have to believe me.
Sir, we're going to discuss this later.
Afrofuturism is one of those things that it seems like even experts struggle to define. So I'm just going to quickly read what Wikipedia tells us, which is Jesus Christ. Afrofuturism is the cultural, aesthetic, philosophy of science, and philosophy of history that explores African diaspora culture with technology. So yeah, I would have worded it that way, Wikipedia. It was coined by Mark Derry in the 90s, so it's a pretty new term, but the idea has been around. It addresses themes and concerns for Afro diaspora through technoculture, speculative fiction. It encompasses all ranges of media, music, movies, books, comic books. It is not just science fiction, but also includes fantasy. Alternate history is a big one, and magical realism is a big one. So I think the easiest way to describe it to just the general person on the street these days is those scenes in Black Panther where we see what Wakanda's like and how it functions.
Yeah, the even shorter version is a whole lot of black shit and white spaces in sci-fi fantasy. Like, that's the shortest version of it, although it's not nearly as encompassing now,
Right.
especially now that there's actual.
It's a way of approaching science fiction and fantasy in a way, in a black way that's not European based, because almost all of science fiction fantasy is either American or European based these days, it seems.
Correct. Although, I mean, one of the things I did notice, and this will probably never come up because it's mostly like historical stuff that's been doing it, but there's been a lot of just like very like Jane Austen style, like Victorian England type of stories that are just going colorblind with casting, and I really like that trend. Like, it's just lending a whole different flavor to a bunch of stuff I would not have watched otherwise.
I'm trying to remember which one I watched. I think it was the one about Catherine the Great. The Great. It was called The Great.
Yeah, it was The Great.
The Great had colorblind casting. Yeah.
Yeah, which was a good call. The one that really struck out to me was The Personal History of David Copperfield, I think it was called.
Mm-hmm.
One with Dev Patel in it. And again, there's no chance in hell I would have watched that if it was an all-white cast. But just like the fact that Dev Patel was the lead, I was just like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And yeah, again, it's a whole thing and just a very different flavor to the whole. Yeah, all of that.
And I mean, I feel like I can't personally decide what counts as Afrofuturism. So when I made the list, and as usual, I made a Wikipedia list to kind of decide on which movies to watch, because we're going to try to cover quite a few here, but obviously not everything I could find. I included a lot of science fiction movies that were fronted and built around the talents of Black performers.
Which is actually good enough, really, just because, again, like up until very recent, like we didn't have the budget to really do those ideas justice in a moving medium like the
Hmm.
way that we do. But now, just the last, especially like 5 or 6 years or so, just like it's exploded. And thank God, I've been waiting for this for literally my whole life, actually.
And yeah, so like I would say Black Panther as a movie and character, that's Afrofuturism. But I wouldn't necessarily count mm, Independence Day or Hancock. Those
Yeah,
are movies that are built around the talents of Will Smith specifically.
yeah, that
But
is.
they are fronted by a black actor. So, and Men in Black is another one in particular that feels like it is not just fronted by a black actor, but is changed because of the fact that they hired a black actor to play it.
Right, yeah. Again, it's not just sci-fi with a black lead. It is
Hmm.
literally like the plot very much weaves around these characters being black.
Right. So, with that in mind, and the fact that I was able, uh, coincidentally, we talked about this doing this a while ago, and Criterion Channel put up a whole bunch of movies in what they called their Afrofuturism area, and I think they're actually going down at the end of this month. A lot of them, so it was bad timing on my part. But I sort of picked the ones that sounded most interesting and watched a bunch of those on my own, and then we kind of are going to talk about more mainstream stuff. But that we're going to start. I mean, one of the earliest things I could find was Blackenstein, which is only science fiction from the standpoint that Frankenstein's science fiction. It's too bad that that's one of the trailblazers here, because it's a very bad movie. But shortly after Blackenstein was released, a movie called Space is the Place was released, which is definitely something that I came to knowing nothing about nothing.
Yeah, and I was in the same boat. Like, I'd heard the name before, and funny enough, the last time I talked to my mom, she had actually heard of Sun Ra. So at the
Hmm.
very least, she had that going. But just the only thing she had to say was he was weird. And I was just
Hmm.
like, he can't be that weird by 21st century. He is fucking weird.
Yeah, he's so what the research I did on him is he's like a sort of uh s- he's a musician, but he also was seeing his act and his music inspired this entire movie. The producer, who is actually an art curator above being a movie producer, named Jim Newman, wanted to build a movie around Sun Ra. uh so the best way to describe him, he's an avant-garde jazz artist who like builds stories into his aesthetic. So he's sort of like the precursor to George Clinton is a good sort of example that I think people are a little bit more aware of P Funk and Parliament.
That's closer. Although, just I think, I mean, like P Funk does not have a philosophy the way that Sun Ra has a philosophy going
Right,
on.
right. George Clinton wants to party. They want to party in space, but
Yeah, like George Clinton wants to party in space. Sun Ra is space.
yeah.
Like that's some whole other shit that I was not ready for watching that movie at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, it's yeah, Space is the Place. It's sold to me and like the descriptions and stuff as this really deeply contemplative philosophical piece that like it sounded so heavy I was like almost not looking forward to it. But it's actually kind of like it's so episodic that there's parts of it that are like sketch comedy, um, and sort of anarchist satire kind of stuff. Like it reminded me a lot of other musical films. It really is sort of a musical film. Uh, One I had to watch for the podcast was Head with the Monkeys. It has a lot in common with the way it's structured. Um, and there's a Led Zeppelin concert movie called The Song Remains the Same that keeps having these nonsense interstitials that are super and pretentious in a very Led Zeppelin way.
The one that came to mind for me was actually the Smooth Criminal section of Moonwalker.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Moonwalkers.
which just like again like that one, Michael Jackson, he's off doing Smooth Criminal, and then all of a sudden Joe Pesci kidnaps a bunch of kids, which is ironic, really. But
Hmm.
after that happens, like he turns into a robot, saves these kids, and credits roll. This one, it's like Sun Ra is playing piano in a club, plays the song that ends the world apparently, and it's just him and the devil sitting on a stage talking about, well, the world's ending, how about we make a bet on how many souls we can save? And I was just like, that took a turn that I did not
Hmm.
expect, and it is only 5 minutes into this movie.
And then it sort of jumps around with different. It it has the kind of look of a kind of mockumentary at some points, but then it's super specific, like meta. It knows it's a movie at other points. It's
That's
very interesting.
Yeah, that's the thing that struck me because I mean, yeah, there are. I mean, the budget does show itself. It's very much
Yeah.
late '70s, kind of like they had $20 in a weekend and that was it. But when this movie opens, I mean, like it's a a very green screen picture of a spaceship, but like they go to this planet and it looks incredible for a couple minutes.
Hmm.
Like it looks like just this foreign planet. I had no idea where the hell they filmed this, but it looks amazing. You believe they're on this other planet, and then just all of a sudden it's a '70s exploitation, and the budget drops way down.
Yeah. And well, and I suppose a lot of the cast is clearly amateur actors, or probably people that the director and Sun Ra knew. The main players are all pretty standard good actors, but
Right, and the
there's
part
definitely.
really that's the biggest thing that just really like throws off the tone is the fact that again it's this very kind of serious premise where again it's Sun Ra and this pimp character named the Overseer who basically fighting for the souls of black people
Hmm.
before the world ends. And again, that sounds like a heavy ass premise. And then Sun Ra speaks, and he is any dude you have seen in a bar in Alabama. Like it
Hmm.
is so like his accent is so deep. Like
Hmm.
nobody buys this dude is from space whatsoever. But again, he tries his damnedest.
Again, I it's just never described as a musical in any of the things I was reading up on it before I watched it. And it really is sort of like a concert film uh, that
I think
has
I think the
sketches
main thing
built
is
into it and a theme.
yeah, I think the main thing is just the fact that like it is a musical, but the music is so like avant-garde and
Yeah.
ahead of the curve that like nobody's just sort of like, well, this isn't Let It Go, but I guess I'm running with it.
It's not a Hard Day's Night. They're not breaks for sing-alongs. uh, yeah, well, yeah, he was, as you said, born and raised in Alabama, and that apparently this was the Chicago jazz scene, which is another thing I know nothing about. I'm not versed in jazz.
So that part I can actually speak to just because
Cool.
my mom basically raised me on this type of stuff. I mean, just I couldn't name names if you tried just because I was
Hmm.
so very young when I was listening to it. But I mean, this is kind of the sound that just if you were it's kind of the black equivalent of being really into fucking prog metal. Like it's
Hmm.
that kind of okay, here are the standards I know and here is how they are completely throwing that out the window. So
Hmm.
it wasn't entirely foreign per se, but just it's a very specific vibe of a very specific place, and unless you know exactly what you're getting into, it's going to just sound like absolute noise. But at the same time, just the artistry behind it. Again, once you can actually hear that, and and it took this movie really like kind of bridge the gap between me and like what my mom was listening to because I mean, like I know prog metal because I fucking love prog metal, and
Hmm.
it took me making the connection between I know these rhythms because I listen to Meshuggah. Like there's just kind of that weird kind of stutter step kind of timing
Right.
going on with this music, where it's just sort of like I see exactly what he's doing, and it's actually really good.
And it's not. Again, everything I'm saying here, I feel sounds pretentious. Uh, but it's not a pretentious movie. I don't think. I think maybe Sun Ra has an air of pretension around him, but I think the movie is really got a sense of humor about everything, uh, and it's just
I,
sort of a positive outlook in general.
yeah, I think it's not necessarily that the movie is pretentious. It has ideas behind it that are more high minded and
Yeah.
I mean, it's very much trying to speak to black people who are like, feeding into this kind of black exploitation thing and just going, there might be another high minded way to go about this, which again, that is shit that we wouldn't hear in the black community until like, and sadly it's him, but until Farrakhan came along.
Right.
Like nobody was really saying this exact thing at that exact time, and then in 21st century, it's just sort of like, oh, all right, he was way ahead of the curve. All right.
Yeah. And I suppose that the fact that it was released kind of in the heart of the black exploitation boom is an important thing, because it does have something to say about those kinds of movies, especially making the Satan character basically a pimp, uh, and the sort of story that plays around the movie is sort of like something you would see from any of those sort of Dolomite clones that were sort of spit out real quick. But then all of this metaphysical stuff exists around it, which makes it more interesting. So the more you're aware of exploitation movies with black people from the 70s, it sort of gives you, so even if I'm not aware of the value of the jazz music, I'm aware of what movies were like for black people at the time, and how what popular movies were like in particular. And I think it says, you can also watch it as, if you really don't feel like paying attention, it works also as a look at the record industry at the time too. um,
Yeah, like there's a whole stretch of this which like would not have been right out of place in like Phantom of the Paradise. Like there's a whole
right.
bit where like they have that whole like Outer Space Incorporated thing, which by the way is the catchiest song in here. I was humming that for
Yeah.
hours after
Yeah.
that. But like there's a whole thing where it's just sort of like he's recruiting people to go to space while just this cool ass jazzy tune is playing. And it's hilarious, but again, it's just done in a very, again, like you were saying, nobody was making films exactly like this
Hmm.
for us.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, again, it would make an interesting double feature with Head, if someone listening already enjoys the Monkeys movie Head, which is a very bizarre movie that's the monkeys basically complaining about their success, and wanting to be free of all of their teen heartthrob stuff. This is sort of like the but this is what was going on in the black music community at the same time. It was like it's a little more serious in that, from that standpoint, but it still has the same kind of sense of humor and vibe to it.
And again, like the thing that also connected to me was the fact that a lot of, especially like the spacey stuff in here, like the direct line was me realizing, whether intentionally or unintentionally, I didn't look it up to find out, but just it reminded me of a very specific episode of Lovecraft Country, which by itself, like that was Afrofuturism just writ large.
Yes,
Like
yes.
that,
I never read the book, but I did watch the series. I heard the series was very different from the book anyway. But
yeah, that's what I heard as well. And I heard just it's a mixed bag in terms of what was better, what was done
hmm
better on the show, what was versus in the book. But there's the one episode where Hippolyta goes through the portal and experiences like the entire history of black progressivism and rebellion and just everything pushing the conversation forward. And just so much of that felt like it was echoed right in Spaces of the Place. Like
hmm
it's like them going to space, having this whole like Egyptian just aesthetic going on. These whole ideas of we weren't supposed to be here, we should be, we need to have our own space as black people where we are free to evolve the way that we should. Just this whole mess of ideas like read on a cosmic scale that just, again, we weren't really allowed to dream that big at that point
right.
for years after, really. Like again, like we didn't get to a point where we could just start talking about sending black people to space until Mae Jemison in the 90s.
Yeah.
Before that, I mean, we were stuck on, like, black people were not going the fuck anywhere.
The black people were in the background doing mathematical equations and not getting
Yeah,
credit for
exactly. And then Kevin Costner came along and no, just kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
So many of these ideas that are in this film, again, like there's parts of it that are just very much black exploitation, and then there's parts of it which are, again, I could not believe like this was written in the 70s. Like I could not believe that was the ideas that were floating around, and we never, I don't know, they just weren't.
They weren't
It
shared
wasn't.
wide.
Yeah, it wasn't the Matrix. It wasn't just immediately mind blowing to my
Hmm.
entire people, basically.
Yeah, I happened to have watched it around the same time I watched Judas and the Black Messiah, which I learned a whole bunch more about the Chicago Black Panther scene. And so the fact that Sun Ra, was in that same scene, I couldn't. I assume I wouldn't have put that together if I hadn't just watched the other movie. But I got a lot of that out of it too. There's the certain philosophies that are coming up in both those movies.
Yeah. And I actually didn't make that connection either. Just the fact that he would have been in Chicago around there, because again, that whole movement. I mean, a lot of it was just the fighting, the revolution, and all that. But a lot of it was just the music and the
Hmm.
artistry, and it was the first time that a lot of white artists started working with black artists towards the
Hmm.
same goal. And
Yeah, because
um,
soon you have, I mean, punk rock coming after that, that starts to change itself, like the British punk scene and then British ska scene that starts to be all about white artists supporting black
Yeah,
artists.
and I didn't learn about X-ray specs until just a few years back.
Oh
And
yeah,
then the
me too.
second I did, just like holy shit, like what didn't we start? God damn it.
Yeah. I was like, I was obsessed with punk rock and that era of punk in particular, and I didn't even know. I knew they existed, but I had no idea that it was a black band. I just didn't know. It's yeah. So yeah, a lot of it comes down to, this is just like, it's amazing what the information age does for this sort of thinking, and the way these ideas can be passed around now. You can watch it on a streaming service. This movie that probably otherwise, I don't even know if it had a VHS release, if it was just shown at reshown at art house cinemas or whatever.
Yeah, from what I understand, like they did like one VHS that just everybody just kind of passed around and
Hmm.
burned. And again, like it's one of those things where, a lot of white people were doing that for like nasty horror movies. We had to
Hmm.
do that for something where it's just sort of like, oh, revolutionary shit going down, but
Right.
we got to pass that around ourselves. Like nobody's going to burn that to a DVD for us.
Right. Right. It's not another movie I talked about on that same other, the Harder They Come was another one of those that just sort of lived because um white hippies really liked watching it at midnight shows, because it had reggae music, and they could smoke pot to it.
I mean,
um
just saying, if you want to get high to this, no,
yeah,
don't do that. This is going to fuck you up. Don't
the
go there.
the costume designs are just the best. I mean, it's like it's almost like low budget, like early drag to the, I mean, just the theatricality of some of these costumes
Yeah,
that
it's that. And like I got like a huge like if you tried to do like a sweeted version of Stargate, like this is kind of what you
mm,
would come up with. Again, like it seemed like the kind of thing that we should have talked about earlier. But like you were saying, like the internet was a mistake for a lot of reasons, but the ability to spread that around
right,
is absolutely like objective good.
right. Well, okay, so then one I watched that you didn't watch, because I told you I didn't think it actually fit here, that is considered a classic, is Lizzie Borden's Born in Flames, which it's not so much a science fiction film, but an alternate reality film. And it was the best of all the movies I watched here. And everybody should see Born in Flames if they can. I think I'm gonna hang on to that one in my back pocket for whenever anybody wants to do a mockumentary episode, because it's sort of set up like a mockumentary about not just Black liberation, but like feminist liberation in a sort of alternate reality. Uh, Super great, awesome movie, but yeah, not exactly what we were looking for this specific discussion.
Yeah, I
Um,
thought the same thing. Like way too late, I thought of Confederate States of America, which is
yeah,
again same thing. We're just it's
alternate history.
yeah,
Yeah,
alternate history, but again, like we do not come out okay in the end of that one. So I'm
right.
just like, I'm gonna pass on that one
Yeah,
right
Born in
now.
Flames has a less depressing ending than for sure. Born in Flames is more of a to be continued type of story. Yeah, but highly recommend Born in Flames. Everybody rush out and see that if you can. I hope Criterion puts it on an actual disc soon, because I will buy that shit out of that. But then one that was also on Criterion that you really wanted to cover was The Brother from Another Planet by John Sayles.
Yes, and again, like there was just this whole thing where like watching this, I kept trying to draw a line to something else I'd seen, and oddly enough, like the thing that came to mind for me was um, Under the Skin,
Mm-hmm.
where just like you put a like alien who's a sexy white lady on the streets of Scotland, and generally just yeah, she can do whatever she wants. She's just gonna feed him to whoever's living behind the veil, and that's gonna be her life. You put a black dude on the streets trying to do the exact same thing, he is gonna get his ass kicked, and
Yeah.
he's gotten lucky that he landed in Harlem because holy shit, that could have gone a different way.
Yeah, I
Which
guess,
I
and
think is the point.
the Scarlett Johansson character isn't a mute, but she does not speak a lot in that movie. So that's an interesting connection I did not make myself, which I should have.
Yeah, and again, like I think just it's both of them are actually singing a lot about like what it Under the Skin is singing a lot about what it means to be a woman, like what kind of power they actually have
Mhm.
over us, and what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, what's going to be, and just the whole point of that being just the fact that she tries to be altruistic and like really explore her world, and that's when she gets beaten and burned to death.
Right.
Brother from
Absolutely.
Another Planet, again, if I believe is he had landed anywhere except the blackest part of America you can imagine, this would have gone very differently. But I appreciate that it was like the polar opposite, because it literally is about how no, Harlem is a scary place, but again, you talk to the right people, we do take care of our own.
Because yeah, it's sort of the idea is it's one of those fish out of water movies, which most alien movies are if they're not about alien invaders, like Starman, for instance. But it's not just an explanation of what it was like to be black in the 1980s, but also what it was like to be an immigrant in the 1980s. There's a lot of and how being an immigrant into this area would probably be better than being an immigrant into a lot of other areas. Um, and yeah, and the way that people take care of themselves, and the way that he grows to take care of other people as the movie goes on. He goes from sort of a completely passive presence to. It was interesting watching this and what we're I think we're going to talk about next is Meteor Man, because you don't think those two movies have anything in common, but they actually really have a lot in common. The way that Community is uh, portrayed.
Yeah, and oddly enough, like I didn't expect Meteor Man to hold up as, and again, kind of skipping around there, but
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't expect Meteor Man to hold up as strongly as it did. And there's one part in there where I was just like, bullshit. But like for the rest of it, it was very much about, okay, I have these powers. It's not about, okay, let's fly all over the world, let's end the Iraq War, let's do all this other shit. It's how can I protect my community right
Right.
here, right now.
Yeah.
And yeah, the whole thing about Brother from Another Planet is again, you have Joe Morton landing in Harlem. He can't speak. He doesn't know exactly what's going on, but very slowly he just realizes again, like there's nothing these people in this neighborhood haven't seen before. I mean, they assume he's Haitian, but
Right.
other than that, that's about the only thing that they know. And even still, they find a place for him to stay. They make sure he gets fed. They make sure he has the ability to get a job. And again, like I lived in Jersey, but I knew enough people. I've been in New York enough times to just know how places operate. And again, there's a tweet that was going around a couple months ago about the difference between places like Minnesota, where like they have the whole thing about Minnesota nice. I'm sorry, I'm about to slander your home state,
No,
but
no, no. But I grew up in Arizona, which is even worse. But no, I
oh
get where you're
snap.
going. Yeah.
But yeah, like there was this whole tweet about Minnesota nice versus what it looks like in New York, and it had this perfect metaphor of Minnesota, that's a place that is nice but not kind, and New York is a place that is kind but not nice.
Yeah.
And that's basically all over this movie, where again, it's just this place that, again, it is big, it is dangerous, it is dirty. And again, if you talk to the right person and you tell them what your deal is, somebody will help you. And
It,
that's that thing that just kind of goes underexplored when you look at like, outsiders really talking about like what New York and what these big cities are, especially when you're talking about black people.
mhm. It's kind of I had written down a note for myself too. I actually saw this in high school, and I was super proud of myself for quote getting it. There's nothing it's like, oh yeah, I guess now that I'm watching it as an adult. Yeah, there wasn't a lot to get there. It's pretty obvious in what it's doing. And then I also realized I had seen it around the same time I saw The Man Who Fell to Earth with David Bowie. So they were all kind of like one movie in my brain, and they have very different messages about being an alien, but they kind of work as companion pieces, considering that one's a black mute alien, the other one is a white, beautiful David Bowie looking man. Um, but watching it again, I realized it's more like E.T., which John Sayles actually wrote an early draft of back when it was a horror movie.
Whoa.
Um, but with Being There, which is a movie about a simple man who just keeps getting through life and going up the echelons of society by basically inaction. He just doesn't do anything, and people just keep projecting their own stuff onto him. So there's lots of scenes in this movie where he'll just stand there silently, and he'll actually be super uncomfortable with the situation, but because he's polite, people will have entire conversations with him all throughout the movie. They'll just project their entire thing and feel like he's answering, even if he's just staring at them uncomfortably.
And even still, like even that kind of clicked with me, just because I mean, for all the positives of New York, I mean, it is just a very loud place that is
Hmm.
always moving. The fact that you do have someone who is just there and still and like is
Hmm.
worried about his own shit, who's willing to listen, that I can see that meaning a lot to everyone there. And again, that's just kind of one of those things that just, unless you've lived in a giant city like that, just kind of feels foreign.
Hmm.
But yeah, like a lot of this just, it felt very much, it made me miss home for one thing, but just
Uh-huh.
it just felt like a very warm place, even though it's a very dirty and dark place.
I think my favorite scenes, because it is a little bit overlong. I'd say if I was going to be critical of it, it sort of meanders a bit at certain points. But I think my favorite scenes are the one where he gets sort of put in. He happens into a bar that has a social worker who finds him a house or a home right away. And his only powers as an alien is he can fix things by touching them, and he can understand language. Those seem to be the only. And he can fix himself too. Like if he gets hurt, he can repair himself. Um, I guess later we learn that he can use his eye. If he takes out his eye and you can hold it, he can make somebody experience uh, everything he's seen and
Which
felt.
was horrifying. That I will say that. Like I get
Yeah,
the idea, but just like holy shit, that went to a Cronenbergian place
right.
that I
But it
did
is
not
it
expect.
it is a good scene where he uses his eye to show a sort of high up the ladder sort of drug kingpin the damage that heroin is doing to
Yeah.
the. And there was actually a note on, it was either IMDb or Wikipedia, saying that this had been written just before the crack epidemic, so they made the drug heroin. But my favorite scenes are the one where he gets put in this new home, and there's a woman there, and she's from the South. I can't remember where,
Yeah, she
Mississippi,
says Alabama.
Alabama, and she just talks to him while he watches TV quietly with her son, and he even like like fixes the son's skinned knee, and the son and him just have this quiet vibe that they understand each other, and it just makes her more comfortable to be in the room with this gentle guy. um and then there's a scene where two people from out of town, two white guys from, again I can't remember, it's somewhere in the Midwest,
Yeah, I
in
can't remember, but
Indiana I think they say.
yeah.
uh they end up in Harlem because they're going to some sort of meeting for like it's going to be one of those self-help guru
Yeah, it
meetings
sounds like a
basically.
Hare Krishna type deal that they're
Yeah.
about to get involved in.
And they get lost in Harlem and then stop in the bar, and then like the guys there don't particularly want them there, but they are just don't have the social skills to realize that they're not wanted, and then they just end up talking his ear off for hours on end basically. um and it's like they find their truth in just talking to him instead of going to this thing that they were going to go, that was probably a pyramid scheme anyway.
And my favorite is just like the capper to all that is just sort of like, okay, they have found their truth. And the bartender just comes right along and is just like, okay, to get back to the subway, here's where you go.
And then shortly after, there's these two kind of Men in Black characters. One is John Sayles, and the other is another actor I always recognize but can't remember his name. It's the guy who's in
David Strathairn, and the
yeah,
second I figured out it was him, I paused the movie and just had to have a moment because holy, just I I didn't realize just he had been working for that long in
yeah.
even
He's
this
got to
kind
be
of
young in
role.
it. He must be really young in it.
Yeah, he has to be in like late 20s, early 30s in it, but just like ironically, I have like this Jesus Christ, that's David Strathairn. Like Jesus Christ, that's Jason Bourne.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and then I guess he's on. Speaking of, if we were talking about TV shows, which we mentioned, Lovecraft Country, he was on The Expanse, which uh, definitely has some Afrofuturism to it, especially in the people who live in the asteroid belt between Mars and Earth have a sort of
Yeah,
uh,
that's one of those shows that like everybody and their mom has told me I need to go watch, and I keep failing at doing so. But I've
y-
heard nothing but good things about.
yeah, the what they call the Belters are sort of a like Caribbean. I mean, they never. It's this far future, so there's not a specific culture that they're based on, but they have sort of a Caribbean British thing going on, and a lot of them are of color. So yeah, just that was the connection I made with him once I figured out who he was. It's funny too because he's sort of supposed to be a physically imposing guy, and I never would have thought of him as such in any of the more recent things I've seen him in.
Yeah, like weirdly enough though, like it's always like the fact that like these two guys like they weren't like Agent Smith characters. Like John Sayles, I mean, he plays the taller one and just like he reminds me of Henry Rollins. He's just
Yeah,
standing there like being all spindly and wiry and like I believe this dude will fuck shit up.
yeah. And so they are good fighters, and there's a great scene where everybody in the bar tries to defend the guy. The character doesn't actually have a name; he's just referred to as the brother in the credits. The John Morton character. They all take their turns trying to defend him, and they don't really have a chance, but they still try. And it's a really heartwarming scene because at that point in the movie, it kind of feels like they're not going to end this on a bummer, even though they're starting to wrap it up, and he's getting pursued by what essentially at one point in the movie he tells the little kid when they're in a museum. It points to pictures of African slaves and points at himself. So I suppose the idea is that he's a space slave, um,
Right. Yeah,
and that
that's the
these guys are taking him back to be a space slave. And so there is like a lot to lose, but at that point in the movie you kind of get the feeling that it's not going to end on a downer. So it's a little bit more fun that these guys are trying to defend him. And also with those guys are so weird, I like it feels like something out of Repo Man, which I think was the same year as this. Yeah,
this was
84.
80. No, yeah, 84. Yeah, so it would
Yeah,
have been
so
the same
same year.
year.
So like this is what's happening in New York. Well, Repo Man's happening in LA. It's two different alien species that happened to be on Earth in 1984. Uh,
But yeah, like back to that point about like that whole bit where he's in the museum and again, like the fact that he came to Earth in a place where again he sees everyone that looks like him. You
mhm.
know, obviously, I mean, he takes off his shoes and like he has three toes. Like that's the only part of him that like really is truly alien about him.
And there's even a part later where the he sleeps with a woman who is just not I was afraid she was going to be bothered by that, and on his way out, she says that he has to cut his toenails. That's like
Yes, that was
it doesn't even really bother her.
right. Again, like if she's working in New York, like she has seen some things you people wouldn't believe. Just
Hmm.
there's like there's nothing she hasn't seen. This is just one more thing. Also, I didn't clock until after I watched it, but just her like ex slash club owner slash manager type dude. That's the dad from Rock.
Oh yeah, yeah, it is. It is totally is.
And I hadn't realized like this was the only other thing I have that I'd seen him in years. So like that was a pleasant surprise for me and the 12 other people who remember what Rock was.
And he's sort of like this, yeah,
Boy, he is sleazy as
polar
hell in this
opposite
movie.
character because in Rock
Yeah.
he's always like the voice of reason, uh, and in this he's just a sleazebag. Um,
Yeah, like and especially the ending part of it where just you find out and I guess we can spoil it again. This
yeah,
movie's
yeah, yeah, yeah. We
April.
can spoil it. A
But yeah, like you get
20
to the
or
end of it
40-year-old
and
movie.
the only way like he gets away from these people is like there's just a whole group of I'm assuming other aliens who had
Hmm.
been there for a while, knew exactly like how to mark their territory, just knew the landscape and blended in. and they finally take him in and they find a place for him to live as a hobo in the subway, apparently. But either way, like they,
We don't see it. Might be really nice where they live. We only see
yeah,
him going there. In my brain, it was Wakanda.
it's possible, but just nobody who's been down into a New York City subway,
Yeah,
yeah, we know the deal. It's just like, oh, that's more urine today. That's very nice.
yeah. I was just trying to make it a little happier by saying it was like a sub
No,
subway.
I like
Like,
your
what
idea.
is
Let's
that?
run with that
What
one.
is that midnight meat train where it turns out there's a whole society of
Oh God, yeah.
people? um, yeah, which I suppose is the whole idea at the end that he finds his own people and goes and lives with them is I'm sure Sales was thinking that in terms of the way when people immigrate to New York in particular, they find their neighborhood where the
Yeah.
Dominican neighborhood, the Jewish neighborhood, the Italian neighborhood.
And again,
That,
like even if it is just sort of like, oh, it's like the underground of a subway, but all of our people are here. Again, that's basically New York. Again, like
hmm
it's a filthy place, but you find the place where you want to go. You find your own people, and it can be a beautiful place. And I think that's the bigger part of it, because a lot of black fiction in particular is either the place where we are is really fucking horrible and there's no escaping it, or it's trying to be like trying to turn this place into a paradise. And I like that it leaves it kind of ambiguous as to whether his life gets better or worse, whether it's prettier, whether it's cleaner, whether it's dirtier,
hmm
what have you. It doesn't matter, you just have your people.
yeah.
And that seems more true to life than anything else, like a lot of other black fiction that I've seen.
So then, yeah, we did mention Meteor Man when we were talking about this because again, I watched these two back to back. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to fit in Meteor Man, but I found the time for it, and then it was on Tubi. If anybody listening wants to watch, it's currently on Tubi. If you can stomach commercials, um, and Meteor Man is not the first black superhero on film. The earliest one I could find was a movie by Frank Packard called Abar, the First Black Superman from '77, starring Tobar Mayo. I do not know what this. I couldn't find it anywhere to watch, so I didn't. But this is the first sort of mainstream uh, of surprisingly many mainstream uh, black superhero movies from the '90s. This is from '93. It's the first in a series that included Steel, Blank Man, Spawn, and the first Blade. Um,
Right, and I argue though, I mean, like Blank Man came before this. I think that
oh,
was
did it just barely?
91,
Probably
just
around
barely.
this.
But again, like this was also the first one where there's a lot of jokes in this, but it's also the first one to really take the premise serious.
Right. Yeah, I
Like,
think Steele tries to take this seriously, but doesn't really work.
did it though? Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I mean to just start this off on like what I could be ending this whole discussion with, but the idea that I've heard people lament the fact that we stopped having all these sort of interesting black led superhero movies, and that like we didn't have anything except for Hancock, which nobody saw until Black Panther. And I think it's less that uh, the American public is disinterested in black personalities. I think that the music industry alone proves that wrong. But I think it's that these were all medium budget movies, and studios don't make those anymore. I think, and
that's
so this
true.
kind of stuff is TV now. So like if it was the '90s, we and these would have been more successful, we probably would have a Luke Cage movie back in the '90s. Instead, we ended up with a TV show with probably even better budget anyway.
And a
Um,
ton of people did try. Like, if I remember correct,
yeah,
the reason why Blade happens because Wesley Snipes was trying to make a Luke Cage movie for years throughout the '90s, and he couldn't get that done. And then Marvel was just sort of like, "Well, what about Blade?" And they were like, "Yeah, sure, whatever."
it was that weird time where they were like, where studios were throwing their D-list characters out. So Steel is another one, and so the fact that Blade, like nobody really, people knew Blade, comic book fans, but that movie really made that character for people because it was something they were willing, like if this movie sucks it won't damage the brand kind of situation.
Yeah,
Whereas after Spider-Man you're throwing everything your brand has out as fast as you can, and then you're having all the A-list guys who happen to be white characters, so then you
that
have
is
to.
the thing that again, like just to go into superheroes in general, that is the thing that like continually starts to strike me as years go on is the fact that you had movies based on the X-Men, you had movies based on Spider-Man, but past that, I mean, it took a while
Hmm.
for any other superheroes to happen. And again, the one that broke through was Iron Man,
Yeah.
which again, comic book folks know who Tony Stark and Iron Man is. He was not that mainstream of a hero
No. I mean,
before.
I read comics and I didn't give a shit about Iron Man
Yeah,
before
like
that movie.
he was like C tier at best. He would show up in an Avengers comic, give him some
Right.
new tech to work with, and then disappear. Like that was the extent of who he was back in you know, the
He's
80s,
a
90s growing up.
he's like a good he was a good supporting character, like him and Silver Surfer and like Ghost Rider were all guys who'd be like, oh cool, they showed up for an issue, but let's go back to the X-Men or whatever it was in the
Right.
90s.
But then like again, like this entire like everything that we now think of as superhero movies, like it is built on the backs of B tier superhero movies.
Hmm.
Of a kind that just we like I'm trying to think of like the first like any original or like super low tier stories that got turned into just anything. And the only original one I can think of is like Split, Unbreakable, and Glass turning into a whole like original thing, and they're
Yeah.
so removed from what we think of as superhero stuff at this point that just they almost don't count.
Hmm.
But just to circle it back to Meteor Man, just like again, like you have like an actual original superhero, and he exists, and they actually take the premise seriously. And I honestly cannot. I didn't look up whether this was a hit or not,
If I recall, it was not, and that's why we didn't get sequels.
which is funny because this is one of those situations where again, like this, like as actually like Rock, like I mentioned before, and like Malcolm X even, where like there were these just massive touchstones for black people in general in the early 90s, like stuff that if you were in a black neighborhood, like this is just all we talked about
Hmm.
for months, for years, and they had zero penetration outside of our community. Because like Malcolm X, I mean, like you had dudes converting to Islam immediately after that movie was over
Right.
when that came out from our community. For Meteor Man, like that was a thing where it wasn't a huge thing, but like Robert Townsend absolutely was a thing. Like he was the Black Lauren Michaels at that point.
Right. That was something I was going to bring up later, but since you've mentioned it, yeah, Robert Townsend is sort of a forgotten character who um, I was really into. I was into the very gentle kind of family friendly hip hop music in the early '90s. So I would watch a lot of stuff just for cameos. And and it feels like he was an even bigger deal, or at least as big of a deal as the Wayans uh,
No, and
are.
it
But
even goes back further because most of the Wayans got their start doing shit
via
for
him,
Robert Townsend.
yeah. So I looked it up, and he still continues to direct things like all the time, but it's just sort of interesting. Why did the Wayans, and I don't know, I might put Martin Lawrence in that category since they were TV kind of people, like why did they have these enduring decades long uh careers, and Townsend kind of just disappeared in the mainstream, I should say.
That was kind of it, just because like even when he was at his, even when he was making R-rated stuff like Hollywood Shuffle, Five
Hmm.
Heartbeats, stuff like that. I mean, like he did just very gentle comedy, really. Again, like the Lorne Michaels of black people, like that's pretty spot on. And just like, yeah, there were like edgy moments and like stuff that's still hilarious today, but
Hmm.
it was never like quite edgy enough to like really keep up with where the culture was headed in like the mid 90s. So like
Hmm.
by the time Living Color was coming up, where like that basically took over, and Townsend just kind of faded away. Again, like I think this was like the last gasp of anything resembling like even remotely edgy for him.
He did do Baps, which was another. Yeah, I just looked up. Meteor Man was a $20 million movie that made 8 million, so
Oh
that's a pretty
wow.
rough. But I Baps was a movie I remember being released and always making fun of the title because I was a 17-year-old and it's a funny title. But that movie seems to have really gotten a lot of cult following over the years.
Yeah,
But a lot
which
of
is
this
wild
is made
because
for
I
TV. A
I had
lot of
no
this
idea
is
he
made for.
directed that one actually.
Yep. He directed BAPS,
Ah,
which stands for Black American Princess.
yes.
Yeah, and he directed an episode of Black Lightning. Oh
Huh.
no, several episodes. So he works on Black Lightning, which I don't even know if that's still on. Did it get canceled? It
I
will be concluded, it says here.
okay. Which it had a run. I didn't even know he was on that. Again, like
Mm,
for a dude that just again he was huge for the
hmm.
community in the 90s, and just the fact that he's gone so under the radar.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
I could not. I could ask a 20-year-old about a Wayans, and they would at least know the Damon Wayans Jr. I feel, and I don't think they would know if they're no matter if they're white or black, unless their parents were really into him. It feels like he just sort of disappeared.
Yeah, aside from Hollywood Shuffle getting a Criterion, which I still need to pick up, by the way, but
Hmm.
aside from that, yeah, his cultural footprint at this point is just gone.
I should say again, because of what this came out in '93. I was 13, and I really only listened to hip hop. Again, it was only the stuff without parent advisories because my parents wouldn't let me have. Um, but I remember being super excited for this movie, and just it was out of theaters so fast I couldn't see it. But I remember renting it. I have very strong memories of renting it and watching it by myself uh, one day. And it's just like, yeah, there was this period where there was a lot of these mid-budget movies that I was always so excited about because they kept on having guest appearances from rap artists. There was Bebe's Kids, which I
Yeah.
watched because it was a cartoon and had Tone Loc as the baby. um, and I think that this fits with. I think that so. There's this sort of style of '90s not R-rated. I mean, some of them were R-rated, but it doesn't feel super R-rated black comedy that's aimed at wider audiences. And I was trying to figure out where it started, but it usually has a whole bunch of cameos and lots of sort of uh, immature jokes about seeing women in their underwear, but then very serious messages about community. And I think that House Party was the earliest one I could think of.
And that's actually a very good starting point, at least to the point where they got popular.
Right.
Because I mean, like you had stuff like Cooley High, and like before
Hmm.
that, and like Crush Groove, stuff like that, which was a little bit more edgy. But again, nobody outside our community actually saw those. House Party, I think everybody saw. That one was
Yeah.
massive.
Yeah, there's a reason it had two sequels and a pseudo spin-off.
Right. But we don't
um
we pretend those didn't happen. But either way,
yeah. Oh
like
man, I loved Kid and Play. I mean, that's how sophisticated my musical taste was in my tweens. I had
which
three
isn't
Kid and Play albums. I couldn't name you a single song now.
which nobody
uh,
will blame you just because
oh,
like they
Ola
were
Ola
that
A.
huge.
Okay, I can name you one song. I don't even know what the title was.
No, that's what
Uh,
everybody called it. No, you're good.
yeah.
We
um,
don't even know. So but yeah, I mean, like that's the thing. Like everybody knew Kid and Play in a way that just not everybody knew Robert Townsend or anything
mhm.
like that, or Robin Harris. Which, and again, like you rattled off all these movies where, like, again, no cultural footprint outside. But again, I saw Bebe's Kids, and that was a packed theater that weekend. I saw Meteor Man, that was a packed theater that weekend.
Who's the Man is another one I thought of.
Yeah, like another one where just again packed theaters, lines around the block in black audiences and
Mhm.
nowhere else.
So they
So
could always make a certain amount of money. That's why they were able to do these medium budget movies because they knew they could depend on something. And then
right,
I think that when studios started putting all of their money into big budget stuff, they just didn't want to take the chance.
right, because nobody had like that level of pull just yet until Will Smith.
Right. And even then, Will Smith ends up being one of like two black people in the whole movie most of the time in those
Right,
days.
like they didn't hinge Independence Day on Will Smith, although they probably should have done that for the second one. But
Yeah.
they like you have like Independence Day, which is very much an ensemble piece. You have Men in
Right.
Black, where like he's the co-star basically.
Hmm.
You have Wild Wild West, which he's playing second banana to a giant spider,
Yeah.
and just like there's no chance for like him to be the sole star of the show
Yeah.
until way later.
Yeah.
And again, financially apparently that's a smart move, just because again I had no idea like those movies had made so little money just because they were such a big deal growing up.
Yeah, well, and me too, just from my own standpoint from what I rented. And I just always was surprised how quickly they went to video, but it's because
Right.
nobody saw them apparently. But yeah, I remember seeing Who's the Man at a sleepover. I remember renting this one for myself because it wasn't rated R. There was apparently it almost got a PG-13, but they fought the rating. There are a couple scenes. There's a scene where he gets mowed down at a bus stop, and he is bulletproof. But in the context of the movie, we don't
I mean,
know
it
he's
is
bulletproof.
rough. I didn't real I had forgotten just how rough that was.
It's basically like Godfather level mowed down, but he
Right.
but he is bulletproof. But I could see them giving it a PG-13 rating and then arguing, well, but he's okay in the end.
Right. And really, I mean, it comes down to the exact thing that you mentioned, which is all these movies at that point, like they had to be positive. Well, and again, like the timing is perfect here, just because again, after this, you start getting into like Friday, you start seeing like just a lot of these edgier comedies and
Yeah,
dramas
I
coming
think
up.
I think the first Friday kind of fits because it is still about community and we're what solving crime in the community for your own. But
Right.
then I think that Boys in the Hood starts to turn and then you get Menace to Society, which is brilliant film, but is so dark.
Yeah, exactly. But again, like I think like Meteor Man skates on that PG-13 rating just because
Hmm.
of that exact reason where like there's that whole joke in Don't Be a Menace to South Central while drinking your juice in the hood. Like there's that whole joke in there where Keenen Ivory Wayans just shows up at random going, message. And there's that whole thing, like that was the whole thing in the '90s. Like you could do pretty much whatever you wanted in your movie, as long as it benefited the community and it had
Right,
like a "don't do drugs" message at the end of it.
right.
And Meteor Man is very much a like again, it's very much a superhero movie. Like it's a fun one. It has a lot of humor in it, but again, the message is still like gang violence and drugs are bad, kids.
Yeah, I was surprised at the degree of the messaging because there's only one scene with police, and the police are treated as another gang basically that needs to come to peace with the Bloods who are
Yeah, that
uh,
plays
naughty by
different.
naughty by nature, and the Crips who are Cypress Hill.
Yeah.
um, but the fact that then the police never show up again in the narrative, and that the gangs are what protects the community from the even bigger gang, I thought that was interesting because I mean, again, my other points of reference are like Who's the Man, where they're trying to become cops and change, because and it's sort of a satire of police, but it's still respectful of the idea of police. And I think this PG rated basic kids movie sort of says no, we don't need them. We don't necessarily need them to take care of ourselves, which is a more modern and progressive and interesting message. And I was very surprised. I kept on waiting for the police to show up again at the end, and they never do.
Yeah, well, if I remember correctly, like they take Frank Gorshin away at the end, and I think that's the end of it.
Yeah, yeah. So
But yeah, they're
they're still
still
using them
there, but
as
like just yeah, they're not the enforcers of the neighborhood. Which, and again, like when that like scene happened, where like again, there's a gang battle, the cops are in the middle of it, and then Meteor Man jumps down and goes like, can't we all just get along?
yeah,
And that ended like I like was looking at my screen just going, fuck you,
right.
fuck
And
the fuck off with this, and then as it went along, and again, you saw those gang members just kind of popping up just all over the place, just doing their thing, and just like, all right, this could work. And then by the end, and again, like they pull a total Sin City at the end. Like it
yeah,
sounds
there's
like yeah, the gangs show up, and it's just sort of like, I mean, on paper, it sounds like, okay, gangs show up, they save the day, blah, 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 blah. No, no, it's full on, like, they're on the rooftops fucking with AK 47.
yes,
Like, they are not fucking around. And that's how the movie ends. I'm just like, damn. But at the same time, yeah, it is progressive in just how much, again, we have to protect our own communities
yeah.
in that scenario, which is not far from the truth. So, yeah, like that was a weird juxtaposition going on, but in the moment, that moment was just sort of like, oh God, what is happening?
Yeah, I kept on waiting for the cops to be like in town shaking people's hand the whole time after that scene, but no, they just sort of leave. It was interesting.
Yeah, the fun part was just like at the end of that, I was just sort of like, now the cops are going to be taking selfies. Oh wait, it's 1993. They don't
Hmm.
have selfies yet.
Nope. No, nobody's whipping out their camcorder
Yeah,
to record cops
I
doing
am
jumping
ancient
jacks.
now, and I am going to go be fetal in a corner now.
um, I should say, as a superhero movie, it's he has too many powers. If we're separating ourselves from the Afrofuturism thing, uh, he's effectively he's an adult Spider-Man with Superman's powers, but his like backstory is like it's very Peter Parker. Like you could see Peter Parker being a teacher at an inner city school. Um,
Yeah.
but then he ends up with basically Superman's powers. But they include, he can fly, he's super strong, he can point and use like telekinesis to move people around, he can talk to dogs.
And
Um,
the one that I love is the fact that like he can touch any book and immediately absorb the contents of it. And let me tell you, I was 11 when this came out, and I wanted that power more than
yeah,
anything in the goddamn world.
I think it misses a chance for a much better joke at the end though, where he and the villain has the same powers at this point, and he's there. He touches a Bruce Lee book, but then the power runs out, and he touches another book, and it's runway
Oh,
modeling. And
yeah, that's
the
the part that
better joke would have been
aged.
him kicking someone's ass with one way modeling, but instead he tosses it to the guy, and they both sort of preen at each other, and it's slightly homophobic, but it's just not as funny. I really couldn't remember how that went. And I'm like, is he gonna beat him up with like runway moves now? But no, it didn't quite happen. He can also make plants grow giant just by sticking his hands in the ground. Um,
Yeah, like it's a movie. It's actually like that's a theme that comes up in our movies a lot, which is like we usually get one shot to do like this kind of story like for a really long time. So usually they put
mhm,
everything they could
every
possibly think
single
of in it.
possible, yeah.
And yeah, like here he has every power in the known universe and uses them all.
Yeah, I do think this might be the knee plus ultra of these cameo movies, though, at the very least. Because, like I said, you have Cypress Hill, you have Naughty by Nature, you have Another Bad Creation as the Baby Lords, I think they're called, the youngest
The
member of the
Junior
gang,
Lords, yeah.
Journey Lords. Uh, Eddie Griffin as his friend, who was pretty up and coming at the time.
Yeah, he was like just barely like famous at that point. Yeah, you had them, you had Sinbad, you
In
had
like just one gag role, he's in two scenes.
yeah,
And like a couple years later, the entire movie would have been built around Sinbad.
right.
um, the
um
one that is really shocking is Don Cheadle, who looks exactly the same in 1993 that he does in
yep.
2021. The man has not aged, but he's one of the main henchmen, and the other main henchman is Big Daddy Kane, who doesn't really act. He doesn't really have hardly any lines, but his physique is just perfect for
Yeah,
an
he's
ageful henchman.
awesome. Yeah, he just has such a look and presence about him. It's great. And then Luther Vandross is in here. It's skinny Luther though, so
That's
don't
the
like go excited.
single craziest casting in the whole movie is Luther Vandross as this silent, badass kind of killer character that we never really see him do a lot, but we know that he's like the quiet guy who will kill everybody in the room.
It's skinny Luther. He doesn't have the
Yeah,
energy to do anything else except
yeah.
glower at that point.
But like I couldn't get it. I had to look it up on IMDb. I'm like, that guy looks like Luther Vandross, but that's not right.
Oh no, it's Luther Vandross, and he has a song on the soundtrack. Of course he does.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, just to rewind real quick, but did you notice he did the song at the end of "Brother from Another Planet"?
No, I did not. I did
Yeah,
not take a
there's
note
a
on that.
rap song that closes the credits in that movie, and it's fucking Joe Morton.
Is it?
Yeah,
I did not. I know I missed that entirely.
Joe Morton doing a message rap about the homeboy from another planet
Man, in 1984 too.
in 1984.
That's before every movie ended with a rap about the
Yes.
movie.
Yeah, like the second I found that out, I was just sort of like, that man is a treasure. Protect him at all costs.
Yeah, I mean, Meteor Man, of course, ends with a song called "The Meteor Man,"
Of
and
course.
it's not quite right. Oh, James Earl Jones is. I think there's just the old school people: Marla Gibbs, Robert. Crap, the guy who played Benson,
Yeah, Robert Guillaume.
Guillaume.
And the one that blew my mind is Esther from Sanford and Son shows up in
Yeah,
the scene being raunchy as hell, and
yeah, and
that's the
just
one that put a smile on my face because I miss her.
Yeah, she's kinda like Sinbad where she has, like, one gag, but shows up multiple times to do it. Sinbad's like the, guy from the Midwest who is just decided to embrace his Black heritage and is sort of overdoing it, but is also telling everybody about it. Like, he's just saying too much, he's not really maintaining the veneer. It's actually a pretty funny joke.
Yeah,
Um
like it reminded me of that joke in "I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker," where like David Allen Greer shows up and like he's talking to Bernie Casey about like why there's a day for like gangs to get out all their aggression and like he's telling all this stuff and then David Allen Greer is just sort of like, no, I don't really know what you're talking about because like I'm from the Midwest, my dad was a lawyer, my mom's a doctor, all my friends are white.
Yeah, it's the same basic joke. I liked that joke. I really liked the joke. My dad was a teacher in an inner city school around this time, actually, in Tucson. So, different cultural makeup, but still, the part where he's making a speech about how these kids are important and we need to look out for them. And he's trying to impress a female teacher. He has like 18 love interests in this movie. Every time there's another woman introduced, it's like, oh, there's no. Apparently, she's going to disappear a little bit later. If you have blink and you miss it, and Imam is the doctor who admits him at the beginning, but then
Right.
she kind of disappears and is replaced by a different nurse. Anyway,
Also
he's trying to
forgot
make
about Wallace Shawn in this scene too.
yeah.
I
Wallace
completely
Shawn
forgot
gets
he was.
one scene where he plays the most Wallace Shawn character.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that guy's complaining about his students, about them slashing his tires. And so uh Robert Towns is making this speech about how they need to protect the kids and they're actually good kids. His x-ray vision keeps kicking in and he keeps seeing them doing horrible things through the walls, including slashing tires. That was a really funny joke to me. Oh god, what was there was one other thing that made me laugh really hard and I can't. Oh, it's his mom making all the little costumes for him. I guess I didn't laugh so much as this. But she's made all these costumes that are like failures. And then there's a
Yeah.
scene much later where they throw him a surprise party to thank him for protecting the neighborhood and everybody's wearing the rejected costumes.
Yeah. Like I
And it was super wholesome and they don't make a big deal out of it. It's just all these people are wearing silly costumes. Uh
Yeah, and that's the main thing of it. Like the whole thing, like again, it goes to some weird, dark places from time to time, but just again, the core of it is actually like this super wholesome movie about like this, nebbish dude who becomes a superhero. And I don't know, like you didn't really see any successful versions of that for a really long time after that.
The closest thing I could think of was, the Static Shock cartoon that was the early 2000s, but that was a kid, and that was a kid that they really patterned more on Spider-Man. It wasn't like an adult
Right.
Spider-Man. It was really a black Spider-Man in a black neighborhood, and, so there was a difference there, but well, now you'd have a black Spider-Man now, of course.
Well, I mean, like the connected dot there is the fact that again, like the dude who created Static Shock ends up writing for Spider-Man, ends up
Yep,
writing the most important Miles Morales stories, and
yep.
look where we are now.
Yeah, I had a chance to meet him at a con here in Minnesota, but he always came to it. So I'm like, I'll just talk to him next year because he has got a line and I don't want to
Oh
steal it.
wow,
And then he fucking died.
yeah,
It was oh god, it was just one of those things. I could have met the guy. But yeah, I mean, we do have the best Spider-Man movie now of many good movies. The best
Mhm.
Spider-Man movie is the one with Miles Morales, and
Yeah, and like again, like I don't think like this directly influenced anything. Although it
no,
should be pointed out that like Meteor Man, like another thing that proves that yes, Superman would work with a mustache. You fucking coward.
that's true. That's a good point. Didn't even think of that. Yeah, he has a mustache the whole movie.
Right, but just again, like you had like Robert Townsend shot his shot, like had this superhero movie, and it's mostly a successful one. Like
Hmm.
I expected it to age worse than it did, and aside from being just very corny and wholesome at times, just again like it definitely gets the job done.
Yeah,
But it's one of those things where just it's too far ahead of where the culture was at that point. 'Cause I
for
feel
sure.
like if it come out like in the wake of say like X-Men or something like that, it probably would have gotten a little bit more attention. But again, you have all these black superhero movies, and until Blade comes out, and again the reason that hit is because it hit the zeitgeist. Like it,
Hmm.
sorry, it came out just immediately post Batman and Robin, so people were ready for a gritty hero.
Hmm.
It came out at the height of Wesley Snipes being popular. It came out right at a time where vampires were starting to get in. Again, it just like it was lightning in a bottle, and it hit at just the perfect time, and it kind of kickstarted everything.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, The Matrix even owes a lot to it.
Yeah, exactly. Like just Blade did trench coats first. Like you can't like not. Well, a lot of people try to just forget that movie like had the impact that it did, but just
Trench coats, anime in live action, and actually using I'm pretty sure Blade used genuine kung fu, or sorry,
oh yeah,
Hong Kong stunt guys. Didn't it get
oh yeah,
like?
they did. Like again, like Shannon Lee is one of the stunt coordinators, and she shows up
Mhm.
near the end. Like the movie's
I couldn't
cred in terms
remember.
of martial arts are legit.
I mean, yeah, it's I can be a snob about it and say it's no Yen Wu Ping, but I'm just
Right.
being a snob who loves Yen Wu Ping at this point.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
by the second one they had Donnie Yen, so they're fine.
oh yeah, that's right. I love the second Blade,
Oh, the
man.
second one is still my
People
absolute shit.
complain about those couple of bad CG shots, and I'm like, just ignore
Just
them.
run with it. God damn
It's
it.
I saw that in the theater and in Tucson, Arizona, and it was a packed theater. And Tucson, it was mostly Hispanic and white people, but man, people just loved it. People are just hooting and hollering that whole movie.
Yeah, and again, going back to that first Blade, like that was the thing where like we absolutely were not sure that movie would end up being the hit that it was.
Right.
Because
I
again, like
I
everything had been so insular at that point, but just again, that was opening weekend, and I saw it in a downtown Newark theater, and just it was a madhouse. Nobody knew that what they were getting into. That bloodbath, people were on their feet, which is something I hadn't seen like except for Mortal Kombat a couple of years prior to that.
right. Right. No, and Spawn actually kind of fits that. If only Spawn had been a good movie, I think it would have hit that same thing because it
But
had the really strong soundtrack.
yeah, believe
Um,
it or not, like again, like it was it's a shit movie in retrospect, but at the time, like again, there had been no black superheroes even remotely like that.
yeah. Well, I
And
mean,
like
when I saw it in theaters, I convinced myself it was a great movie because I was a teenager who really wanted it to be a good movie.
yeah, pretty much like I liked it at the time, but then I realized, oh right, I was 15 at the time. Of course I liked the
Yeah.
Spawn movie.
Yeah. Great soundtrack though.
Oh, the
Um,
soundtrack fucking rips. I love that soundtrack. Um but just yeah, like Meteor Man was just like the last attempt at like being a wholesome like black superhero movie. Well, you had still a couple of years after that,
yeah.
but
Well, but it's interesting because Steel is sort of a punchline to this day. And it's like most people forgot that Meteor Man even happened.
yeah, just it's one of those things where just it was
I guess it helps that Shaquille O'Neal is still in our zeitgeist all the time
yeah,
because he's selling
exactly.
like,
Yeah,
yeah.
like so he's still in the zeitgeist, but just again, nothing about Meteor Man really is.
Hmm.
But again, it deserved to be just because it was just a very wholesome type superhero movie way ahead of when it should have happened. And
It would be nice if one of like Shout Factory or Kino or one of these companies that sort of deals in nostalgia got a hold of Meteor Man and put out a decent Blu-ray version of it because I think it would be I think it would be nicely revisited. I think that Tales from the Hood is an example of a movie that was sort of forgotten and thought of as not great, and then just when it started to pick up steam, and then when they reissued it on Blu-ray not too long ago, like everybody's like, oh wait, no, this was actually really good, and we didn't notice.
yeah, I think the connecting tissue there is the fact that again, there's certain things that just come into the zeitgeist again,
Hmm.
where especially Tales from the Hood, where again, like it was a story, like three different stories. One's police brutality,
Yeah.
one's having a corrupt politician, one's having this gang member who like is visited by all the people that he's affected and killed. I mean,
and and then there's the one with David Allen Greer as the abusive
yeah,
husband.
the abusive husband. So you had toxic masculinity, just shit that for
It's
some reason
amazing. It's like a 30 or 25-year-old movie, and it's like
it could
other
have
than
been made written today, aside from the
other
haircut.
than the costume
Yeah,
or the not even costumes, but like other than, yeah, because like the politician part is based on David Duke specifically, but it's like who the fuck remembers David Duke? We've had a Donald Trump since then. Even before Donald Trump, we had a whole bunch of fucked up white supremacist
Yeah, like
politicians.
yeah, the movie
David Duke was
just
just the first time that one that was a literal KKK guy had been running for something.
yeah, the movie just has remained evergreen in a way that, again, Meteor Man
That
kind
sucks.
of has. Yeah, it's
It
not
shouldn't
great,
be. It should feel old fashioned, but it
but at the
doesn't.
very least, I like the fact that, again, like, there's stuff that lasts, that,
Hmm.
like, isn't allowed to kind of stick around, like, people are remembering it and revisiting it, and it gets to stay in the zeitgeist. There isn't really that kind of thing in Meteor Man, aside from now the wholesomeness of just, again, having a community that cares for each other. That's not quite enough to make it stick, I don't feel.
No, it has this sort of feel of some, like a movie like the Ninja Turtles live action movie. That I but the Ninja Turtles is a brand name. Like if the Ninja Turtles had been made up for the Ninja Turtle movie, I
If,
feel like they
yeah,
would have.
no way.
But Meteor Man isn't a brand name that you pick up on. But I
And
feel like people who like that movie would also. It just there's
well,
something
here's
about this early '90s aimed at kids but not at little kids kind of feel
well,
to.
that's the other part of it because I mean, like, people always forget this, but just if you watch that first Ninja Turtles movie,
Oh
that
yeah.
is a grim ass fucking movie. Like, it is very much just like just dark, dank New York. It's just that it's a dark, dank movie with a sense of humor about it.
Hmm.
So again, like, even if the Ninja Turtles weren't in there, I think it would still have a life as just this cult following kind of
Right.
movie. Where it's just like, okay, here's mutants living in the sewer. Like, it would be something like Chud or like the Garbage Pail Kids movie, except better than
Yeah.
both of those.
Except for actually good. Yeah.
Yeah,
um yeah. So I would, yeah, I think, it was one of the Meteor Man was another one where I just didn't laugh that much, so was kind of shrugging it off until after I watched it again and started really thinking about it more. I think it does deserve a second life.
yeah,
Um
absolutely.
that I'm gonna then talk about the one you didn't get a chance to watch that I watched, which was I'm just gonna talk about briefly here. A movie called Welcome to the Terror Dome, and instead of TO, it's Roman numeral for two. Um, I chose to watch this because it was available on the Criterion Collection set. It's apparently on YouTube now as well. If anybody wants to watch it after it's off Criterion, um, the Terror Dome and implied that it had anything at all to do with Public Enemy, um, and it's one of these cases where there are cult movies. If you're a cult movie fan, you try to learn the difference between if someone asks you, "Is that movie good?" and you're like, I don't know what you mean by good, because I don't think Welcome to the Terror Dome is a good movie, but I think it's a really fascinating and interesting movie. Um, and it's especially interesting now that we have Black Panther, because the Terror Dome is an area, it has nothing to do with the Public Enemy song.
Damn it.
But by the way, I was rereading the lyrics of the Public Enemy song, like trying to find a way this fits, and it really doesn't. So it's basically like, I mean, a really simple way to describe it is the Terror Dome is like the anti-Wakanda. It's this sort of walled off area of this future city where they keep all of the black people and a number of other people that they don't want to deal with. Um, and this movie like really aspires to basically be Blade Runner, but it just doesn't have the money to do it. And there's something really cool about just watching the director, whose name I'm going to butcher here, but I'm going to do my best. Ngozi Onrua. He is trying so hard to get all of this stuff going, and then is being really heavy-handed about this almost cartoonish brutality that these people are experiencing in this sort of horrible mega ghetto. But then every time something happens, I'm like, well, that's just ridiculous. And then I stop for a second. I'm like, that probably actually happens more than never in the real world. So
Right.
it's really hyper stylized, and it really does try for the hip hop thing. It it has a lot of original music to the point where it's almost a musical, because there is a rapper who is rapping between scenes and basically explaining what's going on with the characters to us. I can't remember what you call that. There's a name for that kind of the chorus.
Greek
He's
chorus.
being the Greek chorus, and then the aesthetic of it it was released in 95, probably filmed in 94. It looks like you could just take any 3 minutes from this movie and intercut it and just stick it on YoMTV Raps and put a song over it. And it looks like half the videos that you would see in 1994. That very video quality to it. And yeah, it wasn't exactly in HD. But it it has it's very negative, but then it has these interstitials about um, slaves that wash up on shore in what's supposed to, I guess, be Haiti, but they never really say what it is. And you're never exactly clear on if this is something that's happening in the same universe or not, but they do share a character in between these interstitials. The one recognizable actor in the whole thing is the white woman, who's played by what's her name from Deep Blue Sea.
Saffron Burrows.
Yeah, Saffron Burrows
Oh
is in it
God.
as the white woman who's fallen in love with what basically amounts to the main character and lives with him and his family and is pregnant. And it's like kind of like I'm trying to remember, like, again, we coming back to House Party and Friday. There was a lot of movies in this area and in this era that I think a lot of them happened to be based on black stories that occurred over like a 24-hour or 48-hour period. So this is like 48 hours in this guy having his normal kind of crappy life gets way worse because um, this woman's ex comes into the town, realizes she's pregnant, and everything goes to shit, and they end up killing a bunch of people. And then there's this sort of underground of really well trained uh, young black men that sort of are staging a coup at the same time. So they keep cutting to like watching TV and seeing stuff that he can't afford to film. He's describing on the TV, and it's all really over the top, but it was really interesting. Uh, so like if as long as you're not going into it thinking this is going to be the Black Blade Runner, that that this is something that somebody put together on a very tiny budget, just out of their, just basically threw their heart out onto whatever it was shot on. I was thinking it was shot um actual VHS, but I looked into it. It looks like it was like 16 millimeter or something. It was interesting. So
Like
it,
while you're saying that, like what I'm thinking is just like, God, what is the Black Blade Runner? And then I realized that movie is actually Strange Days.
yeah, that's
And like,
probably yeah. God, did I remember to put Strange Days on the list? I think I forgot it.
yeah, I
Yep.
forgot that might have actually applied to. And again, it's a movie with a white lead, but at the
Hmm.
same time, it is about us in a way that a lot of films directly made for black audiences are not.
Yeah, and it has a black. She's not really a co-lead, but she's pretty
She's a
important,
main
right?
character at the very
Yeah.
least. Again, people like to give James Cameron a lot of shit, but just like I've reiterated a lot over the last year, like the man just is on the right side of history usually.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of anti-authoritarianism in his work.
Hmm.
And especially here, where just like this movie just outright, like the cops are just like slobbering monsters in this movie.
Hmm. Yep.
And just again, like I'm thinking about that in terms of Blade Runner, in terms of the story that's telling. And yeah, we had it, and Catherine Bigelow and James Cameron made it. And
Yeah.
I like that was my one of my favorite movies from the '90s, period. But just now that I'm thinking about that, like I just incepted myself into loving it even more.
Well, that's good. That's good to know. Yeah, I mean, well, I think that a lot of people, speaking of James Cameron and forgetting movies that kind of fit this, Alien versus Predator, the first one, does have a black lead who is based on a character who in the comics I believe is supposed to be either white or Asian, but they changed her. They
Yeah,
changed a
her
lot
character
about
in the
her.
comics is Japanese.
Japanese. That's right.
Yeah.
Because those are some good ass comics, by the way. I just reread them, and some of those Alien versus Predator comics are like I I can't believe the movies aren't better because the source material is so good. And it sounds silly, but it's actually really good stuff. And I always felt like the first Alien versus Predator is like, here's our proof of concept movie. We didn't quite have the budget we needed for it, but here's where we can go with this. And then it made money, and then they made a piece of shit that was an even lower budget.
Oh
Like,
god, yeah.
didn't go anywhere. So someday
That
we'll have
still
a great
blows
Alien
my
versus
mind.
Predator
Like
movie.
you have an Alien versus Predator movie. How do you not throw 250 million at that
Yeah,
immediately?
it's weird. It's weird. They keep making movies which I love, but like Prometheus and Alien Covenant are $250 million movies that did not really draw audiences. And
And like I love those movies to death, but just like you look at that script and throw 250 million at it, but like you look at an Alien versus Predator
mhm,
movie and don't throw that kind of money around. Like that
yeah,
makes zero sense.
it's crazy. But yeah, people should read those if they can find them. The Dark Horse run.
Yeah, and actually, my end was like not the comics, but they actually made a couple of novels about the same characters, and
Oh,
the
okay.
novels are good. And there's actually, if you can find it somewhere, there's an arcade game based
I
on the
remember
comic
that.
books, and it is
It was
absolutely
mostly a
amazing.
fighting game. It was a fighting game,
Yeah,
right?
it
Or
was
is
a
it a
Final Fight clone, basically, but
yeah.
they
Oh, it
did
was a beat 'em up
adjustments.
kind of
Yeah,
thing. Yeah, that's right. I do remember that.
yeah, it
Um
was cool, but it also hasn't been released outside of just a couple like really expensive. Yeah,
and then then that's actually going to take us all the way up to Attack the Block. As far as I could find, there's a lot of the movies that come out after Attack the Block that I didn't have a chance to watch. A lot of shorts that were part of that Criterion Collection thing that sounded interesting. But I should warn both you and listeners that I did not rewatch Attack the Block, but I've seen it several times. So I feel I'm good enough to talk about it if you want to sort of start the discussion about Joe Cornish's Attack the Block.
yeah, absolutely. So and again, that was one of those movies that just kind of came out of absolutely nowhere. Like
Hmm.
I had no attachment to Joe's Cornish. It didn't clock for me that he'd been working with Edgar Wright or anything like that. I just
That was the only reason I knew it, is because I knew him from working with Edgar Wright.
yeah, like I never clocked any of that. I was just told go watch this. Don't
Hmm.
question me. Just go watch it. And I did. And again, it's an alien invasion movie, but it just so happens to have it's very much like if the aliens did not show up, it would just be a really fantastic picture of just these kids living in British projects, just
Hmm.
trying to survive this night from trying to just kind of save themselves, really. Because Moses, played by national treasure John Boyega, Moses shows up. He's right on the fence between either going down the road of this drug dealer or becoming just an absolute hero.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that pushes him over into hero territory. Well, I mean, honestly, in movie and in real life, but
Hmm.
just
Yeah, this definitely got him the Star Wars job.
yeah, absolutely. And the fact that again, like the thing that just keeps flashing in my mind is that final sequence where, well, first of all, whoever hasn't seen it, just, I mean, it's an alien invasion movie that happens in Britain. A meteor just strikes down the middle of this project block. These just pitch black monsters come out with neon blue teeth and just start ripping the place apart, just attacking everyone that moves. And it's up to these 6 or 7 boys who live in the projects to survive the night, figure out why they're attacking the projects of all places, and also guide Jodie Whittaker, who, again, like the second they said she was the 13th Doctor, I was just like, that lady from Attack the Block, really?
Yeah, that's the only thing I had ever seen her in.
But but yeah, just also trying to make sure that she makes it through the night. And there's just all these like little like project vignettes going on in the middle of this alien invasion movie. And the thing that just keeps flashing back is just that final sequence where Moses, John Boyega, is absolutely, he's helped these kids survive. He's got one chance to just kind of run this dead alien out of the building. And it is one of, like, it is right of the Rohirrim level of just rousing, perfect heroism from modern age. Just that is just an all timer of a scene. Just
Yeah.
watching this black kid with a samurai sword outrun these aliens, blow the place to hell. Like he is Snake Plissken, he is Black Panther, he is Finn from Star Wars, just all in one in that moment. And just I will always love this movie for that.
And then he ends up getting arrested himself. And the movie ends with the whole block cheering his name. And that's the first and only time he really smiles in the whole movie,
Yeah.
and that's where it ends. And that's such a like gives you a chill. Like he's earned this. Like he's been arrested. It's going to be a hard road to prove him innocent because there's space aliens,
Hmm.
but like he's made a difference, and this is who he is now. And this is a multicultural group of boys, um, which is also, I think, kind of an interesting uh, sort of slant on the thing. Is it I think half of them are black, if I
Yeah, there's
remember
only
correct.
like 2 or 3 white kids in that whole group,
Yeah,
and the rest of them are just they're blacker than me even. So I mean,
yeah. And then there's the white main characters are a really nice guy who makes and distributes drugs for a not so nice drug uh, dealer, basically, who's played by Nick Frost. And the idea that he's not a villain, that he's actually one of the good guys in this. He's not a hero, but he's supportive, is kind of neat. And then Jodie Whittaker, who at the beginning of the movie, and I remember when this came out, I was still writing for a British website, DVD Active, and there was a lot of discussion. People really didn't like this movie because the boys robbed Jodie Whittaker at the beginning, and they just were so uncomfortable with rooting for what they called criminals. And uh, I remember getting into a discussion and trying to say, like, well, but do you understand that Cornish is trying to show us that people in the uh, 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 people of color and people who are poor are sometimes in bad situations, but that they can still be heroes. And I remember people saying, well, this is not that you shouldn't show them being criminals at the beginning then. And I was just like, but they have to have somewhere to go. They have to have we have to see how bad it could get for them. And then much later in the movie, when Whitaker and Boyega are sort of friends, they go to his apartment and she realizes that he's a boy, that she's been seeing him as a scary man this whole movie. And she goes in his house and realizes he's still, and then I can't remember how old he says he is. He's only like 14 or something.
yeah, 14, 15, somewhere around there.
And
But
he's got like toys and stuff still. And it's just like, it dawns on her how, like he was a kid, and that she should have supported, as an adult woman who's living in this place, that she probably should have been more supportive of him up till that point. I think that's another really important thing that happens in the movie that went over a lot of people's heads, and I don't think it was a strictly British thing. I think that,
that's a societal thing here.
yeah,
Like that's a first world thing altogether.
yeah, you can't watch the people at the bottom of the societal rung. If they're going to be heroes, they have to be heroes the entire movie. They can't exist in a place where their hardships are causing them to do unheroic things.
And and just looking over just everything I did watch for this, just that's a connecting thing. Like once you side on, the side of people of color, once you have people of color making these stories, like
Hmm.
a common thing is just there is no like strict, good guys are here, bad guys are here, and just anybody who commits a crime goes to jail.
Hmm.
Like even like again, Meteor Man is the closest we come to this, just because it is kind of a black and white hero story. But even then, like you have people who are getting into shootouts, you have people who are in gangs, but just again, there's forgiveness there for what they might be going through. There's just an acknowledgement of the circumstances that create them. Like you have the main character who's a teacher watching his students get into all this other shit while they're on the streets, and him not even going like, I'm going to call the cops or anything. It's just him saying, look, here's the circumstances these kids come from. We have to figure out a different way around this. That's not really a thing you see in, especially just superhero movies, but just sci-fi fantasy where it's made by, especially just affluence, by white people, by just anyone who's not in that particular situation or hasn't been there.
Hmm.
Like it's still very black and white about who gets to live, who gets to go to jail, who gets to be forgiven, in a way that just again Afrofuturism that just seems to not be a thing. Like we just recognize that authority works for us very different, so we have to look after ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to talk about the most popular movies in the world, no, we do have Black Panther now. It's there and it's great, but the Marvel movies still struggle with this. I think they're trying to be progressive, but they don't really. I think that they struggle with the idea of authority a lot of the time.
Yeah,
Um,
and Falcon and the Winter Soldier really starts rubbing up against the limit of
mhm,
what kind of story you can tell within this framework and still call yourself trying to be progressive. Because, and again, keep in mind, I did like where that series went. I love just where they go with Sam. But
mhm.
at the same time, again, like you have revolutionaries who are 100% in the right,
Yeah,
but they can't
yeah.
make them too right.
Yeah, it was frustrating. Shit, we're making these people too great. Like
Right.
the revolutionaries. I don't understand why Falcon or the Winter Soldier would not be on their side at this point.
Right. And I think it is just kind of a case of, again, if you start selling these types of stories in far more authoritarian countries, that's just a
Hmm.
message that's not going to fly. Like, the
Hmm.
revolutionaries have to always be wrong. I mean, like, you're basically running into international Hays Code at that point. Like, the
Yeah.
bad guys have to be super bad, or else it's just not going to sell as well as it could.
Yeah, and it's something a lot easier to put into comic books, which have lower readership and don't need to make back $300 million budgets.
Yeah, and
Um,
honestly, I mean, it's easier to even put on TV. Even like I keep
mhm.
thinking back on Watchmen, which belongs in this conversation, even though it's a TV
It's true.
show.
Yeah, I
But
mean, I wasn't thinking of it as a movie, but it is very close to a movie since it was a limited series.
yeah, I mean, like honestly, you're looking at something closer to like the Snyder Cut with like
Hmm.
Watchmen. Like
Yeah.
it's not quite as cut and dried as a TV series, but it's also just something you couldn't throw an 8-hour movie up there the same
Hmm.
way. But it's also just, again, it's playing around with those ideas on a level that, again, because it's people of color, one, they Lindelof had people of color in the writing room, which makes a lot of difference every
Yeah.
single goddamn time. But the fact that it was people of color writing about these heroes and just figuring out where we have a place in there, especially as far as subverting the expectation of it,
Hmm.
and I think there is where you have a lot more leeway because, again, you don't have to sell that and then make all of your money back on this one TV show. You can just make your
Right.
thing and just let it live forever. So the
Yeah,
fact that
HBO
they,
is really good at reselling Blu-ray collections, and
God,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. So they're usually of all the studios, HBO is one that's usually willing to to have something not be a hit right off the bat.
Right. And even then, like, I can also point at American Gods, which, again,
I've
that
never
went way downhill, like,
I
as
and I've still never watched it, and it's like Stars is like one thing I don't have access to.
Yeah, I that was one of the things where I broke my rule about getting another streaming service where just like I have to see what they did with this. And season
Hmm.
1 is absolutely just excellent across the
Yeah,
board. And then Brian Fuller left and it went downhill. But
yeah.
one of the things they did was the fact that, again, they very much play up the fact that Shadow Moon is black and he
Hmm.
has to navigate this entire world of gods and monsters while being black and having these other ethnicities also have their gods at play, and just, again, like it's way more multicultural in a way that I Neil Gaiman doesn't exactly gloss over or screw over in any way, but just he's very blind to it just by nature of being a white guy. And I think the show really does a great job of making sure that an international coalition of deities really feels international. Like it feels like it represents
Hmm.
everyone in a way that just doesn't happen in anywhere else. Again, like it's not quite as cut and dried and down pat as it should be for this conversation, but I do like the fact that, again, we're seeing these stories that we've long been denied. We're seeing them on TV more than we even are on screen.
Well, and then to take it back to Black Panther, which I when that movie came out, I went back and I read a whole load of basically there's actually not that many Black Panther comics. You can read basically the entirety of Black Panther in a summer. Uh, and reading the places they went with that, and that the comics are constantly dealing with the fact that no matter how free Wakanda is, it still operates under a very strict monarchy, and it's something that a lot of the good writers really make something good out of. And the newest comics, the run that just ended, the Ta-Nehisi Coates one,
Mhm.
which I honestly, it might get me hate mail, but I think the beginning of his run was not very good. I felt like he was dealing with uh, the idea of it being a sort of authoritative state, and that was something that had already been dealt with, and that the movie actually did better. But later he developed this really interesting story arc where Black Panther is getting a signal from space from like a colony, a Wakandan colony, and he goes there and he discovers after a lot of stuff happens that there's actually, because of the whole interstellar thing where the further you are away, the more difference time works.
Yep.
That it's actually a group of Wakandans that he himself sent into space, and thousands of years have passed. And they've colonized space, and they're the colonists, and they're the bad guys now. And the Black Panther trying to deal with this problem that he's created. That was really interesting Afrofuturism to me. That was like a sort of next step idea that's like, now that we have this group that wasn't colonized, like what happens when Africans aren't colonized? Now we have this story of what happens if then they colonize something, but then they put it in space instead of on Earth, which I think was a more interesting way of doing it than just an alternate reality story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're starting to rub up against that idea in Afrofuturism now, just because we have all these examples of black people in sci-fi, in fantasy, in all these different realms that we weren't before, and we're starting to finally get to the point where like we've told the stories that we can there.
Mhm.
Now, what happens when we have power?
Yeah, now you can have the sequel. It's
Right.
always like you got the setup, now you can have the sequel.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that's going to make the actual Black Panther 2 movie like really interesting. Not just because, Chadwick Boseman is gone, but
Yeah.
just because they have a job ahead of them even trying to make sense of, okay, Wakanda is still in power. We may or may not have a king now. Like, what kind of story can we tell using this society and not just rehash what we did?
Yeah.
So,
I
go ahead.
I want to use this as to get on record. What my guess is that they're not going to kill off T'Challa, but that because in the comics that I think they're going to start adapting soon, he has stepped down as king of Wakanda, isn't it, to be the king of the necropolis. My guess is that there's going to be some sort of like pre-credit thing like there was in the first movie, explaining that after Thanos' snap, and everybody came back, the necropolis is like in disarray because a bunch of dead people came and then went, and so he had to go to the necropolis to talk to get things together, and has left whoever in charge. And I think there's going to be multiple Black Panthers. I don't think they're just going to have Shuri be Black Panther, but I think that it's going to be that the title of Black Panther applies to whoever takes it up, and there can be multiple at the same time. That's the guess I came up with when I couldn't sleep the other night.
I would love that, but again, that's what we thought was going to happen with Skywalkers, and look how
Yeah,
that turned out.
yeah. I have a little bit more faith in the people making this
Oh, for
particular
sure.
movie.
Yeah.
And they had a little bit more. Actually, they didn't have more time, but I think they're people who you're using their time better,
Yeah.
and they have a lot of goodwill on their side. And unfortunately, uh, through no fault of its own, Last Jedi produced very noisy bad will. I don't think it actually had that much bad will, but yeah,
Not really, but they listened to it, and that's what's
yeah,
important.
exactly. um, but speaking of Black Panther, there's another movie that came out the same year that I think we're going to end things on here, called "Sorry to Bother You,"
Yeah.
from Boots Riley, who is a kind of jack of all trades kind of guy.
Yeah,
Very
like it's
interesting.
kind of an interesting bookend with Spaces to Place, actually, because he's kind of
Yep.
in the same boat, like just
Yep.
artist, writer, director, musician. Although I think his music is a lot better, but just
Yeah.
yeah, just all around jack of all trades, master of most of them, actually.
And also like a genuine uh political, like I don't know what he would call himself, a Marxist or socialist or whatever, but someone who studies uh the politics of leftist politics. He actually, like, there was that situation where he got in a argument with Spike Lee about changing things in a Black Klansman and making it too pro CIA
Yeah,
or
and
FBI.
and again, Black Klansman has a lot of power in it, but Boots Riley was not wrong. at
He was
all.
not wrong, and so he just seems like a really interesting character that it really knows what he's talking about, which is, a lot of filmmakers have ideas, political, social ideas, but aren't equipped. They're filmmakers. They're a different kind of artist. They aren't equipped to really talk about it in that way. And I think that he's someone who, no matter what you think about the movie Sorry to Bother You, I think he's someone who has brought it, is equipped to bring it into an entertainment realm, and still not water down his message or messages. There's like a lot of messages in this particular movie.
Yeah, that's the main thing. Again, with the keeping in the theme of just, you shoot your one shot, you throw everything you have at it.
Hmm.
There's a lot going on in here. But I also think it's a lot clearer about what it's trying to say than a lot of those other efforts.
Yeah.
Which is, I think that's the biggest difference between this and, again, anything that came prior, is just there's a patience with this, with the audience, with the premise, and like it knows exactly where it's trying to go, and it's not throwing everything in haphazardly. Got a definite, it's got a clear line saying exactly where it's trying to go and how it's trying to say it.
Right. And it's sort of framed in the same way as a sort of Zucker Abrams Zucker. Those like spoof comedy, like an Airplane. Like it feels like a lot's going on, but it's just sort of using that, our memory of that kind of storytelling, to sort of collate everything. Because it is a little, like Space is the Place. It's a little episodic, not nearly as episodic, but I think that the structure makes. I gotta keep bringing up structure, but I think structure is Sorry About You. It could have been this formless, interesting movie, but it has a very specific form to it that I think holds it together better than a lot of movies. I think that's another thing that makes Get Out, which is not a sci-fi. Well, actually, Get Out is kind of a sci-fi movie, isn't it? It's about
Yeah,
brain
like
transplants.
with the end of it, yeah.
But they're both movies with interesting ideas, and good way of putting them forward, and a structural strength that really makes it easy to stick with, I think.
Right, like it breaks down very easily in chapters, really, of this
Hmm.
dude's life. And again, like when it starts, it's just the fact that, this dude needs a job, and the only way he's going to keep that job is to be the whitest he can be while on the phone.
Hmm.
And it ends up working. And then just the next chapter is just bringing up, well, okay, you're a black man, you've managed to ingratiate yourself into this white world. How do you wield that power? Especially when you have other black people who are not doing as well.
Right.
And it's just very much going down this rabbit hole of, as we were mentioning, just what happens when black people figure out that they have power, and who's going to be using that power and for what end.
And it approaches it from a lot of angles, because his old job, there's a whole union busting subplot, and then his girlfriend, or I guess partner, Tessa Thompson character, is approaching her revolutionary thoughts through really avant-garde art
Hmm.
and performance art, that he doesn't really get, and which is, it's an interesting way to show it to us, is through his eyes, that, and he's uncomfortable with his situation but trying to look past it, and she's making him look at it, which is, I guess, kind of an old storytelling thing, where you'll have the male character that's kind of fucking up and has to have a woman come into his life and explain why he's fucking up. But I think they're using that to their, I think Riley's using that sort of storytelling convention to his advantage. I think he's doing that on purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like the fact that it goes from there to, yeah, I think at that point, just he's already been accepted into the upper echelon. But again, once you get into that point, I mean, you get to the people who have all the power and money and have to figure out really fucked up ways of wielding that power.
Right.
And there's no innocent way to go about it. I mean, even as, wild as the parties can be, again, there's always a human cost.
Right.
And to present that as literally as this does is a choice, and it's a good one.
Right. And that's the point. It's almost like a spoiler to call this a sci-fi movie, because the first half plus, most more than half, really just feels like a sort of alternate reality. There's not a lot of science fiction going on until that sort of reveal um, of what's going. And got now thinking about Army Hammer's character. He's just sort of playing himself. We've discovered now.
Yeah, I was just thinking like this wasn't that far off from what he got called out for, was it? Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of unfortunate. But but it gets something I really like. A big fan of George Romero movies is when your sort of horror, sci-fi, fantasy uh, analogies are really close to literal. Like they're pretty much punching you in the stomach and saying, "Hey, get it?
Yeah.
The zombies are the disaffected. The zombie, like it's at that point." And I feel like maybe we shouldn't spoil what happens in this one because it is a really pleasant surprise. And
Yeah.
I think something that people initially are react badly to, either accept it or you grow to hate the movie. I think is the two things that happen.
Yeah, pretty much. And yeah, I'm with you on that. If you haven't seen it, just that now's the time. Don't hesitate. Just go. Just it
Yeah,
takes a turn in that
I
final
th-
act that is again, it's very literal. It's not even trying to pull punches. But
yeah,
again, like you were saying with that Romero reaction, like his whole ethos was sometimes you need that in order to get your point across.
yeah.
And
And I think it's a really entertaining way to tell stories. Personally, I like the EC Comics kind of approach to things. Sometimes I think it's cool. I think that a lot of people think we have to be more subtle to be good. Like like movies have to be subtle in their messaging, and like subtle messaging is cool, but so is hammer you over the head messaging. It's great. And
right. And a lot of our movies, again, they're not subtle about what they're about either, just
mhm.
for that exact reason, where like you want to get other people involved in what you're trying to say. And like you cannot sugarcoat that message under any circumstances, or else white people can just take it however they want. And it's usually the softest possible version
Mhm.
of what you're seeing.
Yeah,
And
like Get Out is one where uh people somehow still got Get Out. Like I've somebody posted something about on Twitter, some conservative laughing about how Get Out was about terrible liberals, and a lot of liberals objecting to that. And it's like, no, it really is about terrible liberals. It's not about terrible conservatives. That those movies already exist. So yeah, it does seem that even something as obvious as Get Out, people can still really misread what your point is. I mean, and maybe that's part of the fun. Uh,
yeah, I mean, it's part of it. I mean, like, it's Peel did a really awesome thing where just when there was that whole argument going around about whether Get Out was a comedy or a horror, and his whole thing was just to sit back and watch it happen because literally everybody who didn't say it was a horror film, that's the enemy right there. Just
mhm,
if you didn't see just how absolutely dehumanizing and horrific this whole situation is,
right,
you're the person he's trying to get to the most.
right. Right. So yeah, it's fine that sorry, Bother You is a little bit. I mean, and Sorry Bother You is a comedy. It's a comedy that gets darker as it goes on. It's a sort of feels like a Wayans brother thing with the voice thing. It's like it like feels like it could be just silly, and then it
Yeah,
just keeps getting darker and darker as it
I
goes.
came out of it describing it as the black being John Malkovich.
Yeah.
And it's just
Yeah.
kind of like that whole thing of just like it's a very simple premise at the beginning that just it's just a rabbit hole of weirder and darker and weirder, and somehow it's still funny the whole time.
Yeah. It's using the term Afrofuturism, which I'm saying I can't describe. I'm going to use a term I can't define even more. I think it's Kafka-esque. I don't. It's Kafka-esque. Kafka-esque is one of those things that it's really hard to define. It's something about the nature of bureaucracy and existential crises. And so I don't know exactly what Kafka-esque is unless I see it. And I think that
No, this would definitely
this
count,
fits.
especially where this film ends up going, where it's
Yeah.
just again, it's about dehumanization on several different levels. And
Right.
yeah, and the part that really got to me this time was the again, trying not to spoil what happens at the end, but there's a whole segment there where it's about essentially an Amazon-like corporation and what they're doing with their workforce to prevent them from unionizing, but keep them
Right.
working. And all
Right.
I could think of was what just happened with the Amazon facility in Alabama, which was almost exactly the exact same playbook.
Hmm.
Like, just keep them apart, make them wonder if they can live without us, and then make sure that they can't.
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, I mean, like, it's not even Afrofuturism; it's just like straight out just allegory at this point.
Yeah.
And the fact that that's happening is horrifying, but it also means that it's just absolutely vital work going on.
I agree. It's I just looked it up. It is currently streaming on Hulu, and Hulu seems to hang on to stuff for quite a while. So
Yeah, it's actually where it premiered. So yeah, I don't think it's going
yeah,
anywhere.
yeah. So yeah, there. That's where it is. So that must mean Disney owns it. It's just kind of funny, but whatever. um, yeah, and so that was the last thing I watched. We talked about covering Wrinkle in Time, but I didn't end up having time to watch it. So I don't really remember a lot of it. I mostly remember that reading the book as a child and how different the movie felt from what I remember the book feeling like. Not because they cast people of color, but just because her whole imagery was just very different than what I had remembered picturing when I was a kid. I remember, I think maybe because I had seen Neverending Story, so everything looked like the Neverending Story to me.
And no, that makes sense. And again, like, in terms of Afrofuturism, especially now because, like we were talking about earlier, with just taking these traditionally white stories and then just saying, we don't know what they look like, so just cast anybody.
Yeah,
And this having a more of a slant towards this biracial child, like, really going on an adventure, being guided by spirits who are just everything that a girl wants to be, as opposed to this is what a white person thinks is cool.
yeah.
That's, again, it's just a very different vibe than the book. I do think the book is better in terms of its set pieces, just because the book
Hmm.
is a lot creepier and just kind of just weirdly sterile in a way that's really fascinating. But
Yeah.
at the same time, the heart of that movie is the fact that, again, this little girl is just realizing herself more than anything else.
Right.
Like, the thing that always sticks with me is, like, they stopped the movie dead just so Oprah can tell this tiny child that yes, she belongs here and she's beautiful.
It's like the Alice in Wonderland story if the characters in Wonderland were supportive.
That's perfect. Yes, exactly. So yeah, I really love that. I know it's just a different sort of vibe than the book, especially, but just
Mhm.
I came out of that really, really liking it. Also, the
Yeah.
soundtrack is amazing, but that's beside the point.
The other one that I did not rewatch that is interesting because I just read the comic Sweet Tooth in preparation to watch the TV show Sweet Tooth. And it reminded me a lot, the comic at least, I don't know how much they changed, of The Girl with All the Gifts, which itself is based on a
Yeah,
book. I don't know if you ever saw that, but
I
the
did. The main reason I ended up watching that one is just because everybody in my part of the world was basically saying this is the Last of Us movie.
it
Like,
is really close. I they were and the book. It's possible Last of Us people were aware of the book, but it was kind of around the same time.
from what I understand, like, they absolutely just weren't. It was literally like the game was in development around the same
Hmm.
time that the books were even coming out. So much of that just happened concurrently without anybody knowing what was going on. I'll take their word for that. But just, yeah, they are remarkably close. Just a, again, very different thing where The Last of Us is about this father daughter story turning into something much, just, again, taking the father daughter trope and turning it into something, like, taking it to the ultimate just fucked up
Hmm.
power. Meanwhile, Girl with All the Gifts is about this, it's very much the little girl story
Yeah,
about her figuring out this, just wait a second, these kindly white people, yes, you're all very kind to me, but you're actually not my people.
right. And that's the thing is, for a lot of the movie, it feels incidental that she's black. But
And
then
yeah,
as it starts to go on, you realize, and that's what made me think of Sweet Tooth, which again, I haven't seen the show, they might have changed things, but the Sweet Tooth comic comes to basically the same conclusion that Girl with All the Gifts comes to, with regards to finding your people and realizing that the world doesn't exist for certain people anymore, that it's not their world anymore. And her coming to that conclusion is just that it makes a very good movie great. I think is the where it ends up.
yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it's like a cool zombie action movie with really good performances until like the last third, and then it really, like all good zombie movies, it's really about something else.
Right. Girl with all the gifts, like you get to the point where there's no more hope left in the world except for the fact that there's still all these people who are willing to make another world, but you have to listen to them.
Yeah,
Like it's
and
very much about again like how the the people in power actually use that power at their worst versus how people who are marginalized are using it, and it's just a very interesting just juxtaposition between those two.
yeah, and even and the good white character has to come to terms with all that she it's almost the opposite of the Last of Us video game ending, where you need to either save the girl or save the world. And you feel like you're building to something like that, like she thinks she can find a cure in this one girl who can function even though she's a zombie, and she eventually comes to the realization that that's not what her lot is in life. Which at this point I feel like I'm just spoiling the Sweet Tooth comic, but just basically almost the exact same thing happens. I just read it last night, so it was kind of funny to me. So it just made me want to talk about that particular movie.
No,
Um,
I only watched the first episode, and the first episode of the show is really really good. I just haven't
okay.
gone forward with it, but
Well, I can start now because I finished the comics.
yeah.
So I wanted to compare. I figured it was worth comparing. That's the last movie I really have to talk about on this particular list.
Yeah, and my whole thing was just to bring that whole thing full circle is the fact that again like every movie medium right now has some story along these, like it's not like an anomaly like it used to be where
Hmm.
just black characters existing in all these different genres. It's just kind of the norm now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm counting like since Attack the Block, this list I made, I hadn't even heard of a bunch of these movies because it's actually something. I guess because again, medium budget movies can go to streaming services now, so it's, yeah, studios are making medium budget movies. They're not putting everything into these giant things, and there's people like Janelle Monáe who can get a move that, her fun
Dirty
thing
Computer,
made,
yeah.
yeah, on her name alone,
Yeah.
which helps a lot too, I think.
Yeah, the other thing I think of is, well, there's two. There's a movie called Fast Color, which is just kind of like a very dour kind of superhero take on a story. But the
Hmm.
other one that I think of is a movie called See You Yesterday, which
Hmm.
is on Netflix, but it's
Yeah,
also one of the few time travel movies with black characters that I've ever seen.
yeah.
And I hate to use him as an example, but just the line is perfect. But like, there's a thing Louis C.K. used to say about black people just cannot fuck with time at all, just because
Hmm.
anytime before 1980, and just no, just don't
Yeah.
want to do it. And this is them using time travel. Like, they don't even go that far back, but just seeing how like tiny decisions just come to bear on black people in general. Again, it's a very different thing, and I don't think I'd have ever seen something like that in a moving form just prior to say like in the last 10, 15 years.
Hmm.
So just it's a very different landscape now that again like there's platforms galore for people to take chances.
You got the platforms, and you have just between Get Out, Black Panther, and Us being hits. I think that
People realizing that yes, you can also make a shit ton of
you can
money
also
while
make
doing
money.
that. Right.
Middle-aged white people will also watch these movies.
Yeah, like I think very much like the next step here is going to be okay, we are here in culture. What's going to happen? What do we do with that voice?
Hmm.
And that's a question that I can't really answer, but it's going to be interesting to see.
I mean, especially with something like Wakanda Forever, which has so much goodwill behind it at this point, and they've gotten all the basic superhero stuff out of the way between the the movie and the Infinity War, they've gotten all of that stuff out of the way, and they can really open it up. So
Right, and just
it
I've appreciated just how weird and just different every Marvel thing has been so far since
since
Endgame.
then.
So, like, again, there's no excuse to just not go balls out on whatever
Mhm.
they're doing with Wakanda Forever.
To wrap things up, I'm going to do the usual thing where I ask you to say what your where you can be reached, what your social media, where your stuff is. But because I remembered you do a good impression, I'm going to ask if you can do it in the voice of Bane from the motion picture Dark Knight Rises.
Oh God! All right, so yeah, I can be found on the Twitter at Justin of Clark. I can be found at GameSpot or Slant Magazine. No one cared who I was until I had a Twitter. And I suppose right now, if you are in need of a walkthrough for Resident Evil Village, my last bit of work was an entire walkthrough for that game. It's pinned to my main page, so go there if you need some help. We shall take that game back from the corrupt. And I suppose...
I should ask Bane, is that a first-person game? Because additional Bane cannot play first-person games without getting nauseous.
It is first person. I would recommend bringing some Dramamine. Or some ginger ale.
Yeah, crap. First person. I can be reached at Gabe M Powers on Twitter, or the Genre Grinder Twitter, or on the Genre Grinder website, which I'm going to have some cool new reviews up. I just got quoted on the official trailer for Arrow's 4K release of Bird with the Crystal Plumage. It was a pleasant surprise. The guy just sent me an email saying, "Can we quote you?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah, you can quote me."
Those are always the best emails, because it's very rare where it's just sort of like, "Hey, can I quote you on that?" And just like, "Fuck no, we have privilege, we have standards here."
It's like, no, that's something I actually do love.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Justin, for doing this. This was very good stuff.
I'll show you where I made my podcast, then I'll break you.
Broken any good backs bit lately, Dave? All right, talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.
So long.